Demons of the financial system. In antiquity, humans were unacquainted with a financial system or currency. Commodities held their intrinsic value. Thus, barter prevailed, a system founded upon the natural economic law known as the law of supply and demand. Under this law, a reciprocal relationship exists between the value of a commodity and its abundance. When a commodity is scarce, its value rises, and conversely, when it is abundant, its value diminishes. Take, for instance, gold, a rare natural metal, extracted with significant effort. This very rarity elevates the value of gold above that of readily available sand. Imagine if the sands of the world were to transform into gold nuggets, undoubtedly gold would lose its worth and become less valuable than coal. Suppose all the farmers worldwide planted wheat except for one who chose to cultivate tomatoes. In such a scenario, the value of a single tomato would inevitably exceed the value of a ton of wheat. These are mere illustrations of the law of supply and demand, a natural law governing commodity values. Therefore, it was only natural for early societies to rely on this law in systems of barter or exchange. However, a flaw in the barter system rendered it unsuitable as a true financial system, especially as populations grew and economic activities diversified. This law is governed by a subsidiary factor, the need of people to acquire a particular commodity. Since needs vary from person to person, agreement was necessary to adopt a single commodity that fulfilled certain conditions and criteria. It had to possess value, be easily storable and transferable, not degrade over time, and be in demand or desired by people. Gold fulfilled these requirements, thus becoming the cornerstone of commercial exchange. All goods and services came to be valued based on the worth of gold. If a rare commodity were to emerge, with high demand, its value equaled that of gold, with 1 kilogram of it worth the same as 1 kilogram of gold. Conversely, if another commodity was moderately available with average demand, its value was half that of gold, and 1 kilogram of it equaled half a kilogram of gold. In this manner, gold acquired its value as a standard for evaluating goods and services, replacing the barter system. However, a new problem arose due to the value gold had acquired. It became the primary target for thieves. Why would a thief steal tons of wheat when they could pilfer a few grams of gold, equivalent to the weight of this substantial cargo? In brief, gold became what we know as easy to carry and dear in price. At this juncture, a historic transformation occurred when one of the earliest capitalist visionaries constructed a large vault guarded by sentinels to safeguard people's gold in exchange for a small portion of it. Yes, this marked the inception of the banking systems. So, the owner of the vault takes the gold from the individual and provides them with a promissory note, duly inscribed with the value of the deposited gold. When the gold owner requires it, they visit the vault, surrender the note, and recover their gold with the agreed-upon portion deducted. However, a new issue arose as the exchange of goods became more time-consuming. If an individual wished to purchase a commodity worth 10 pieces of gold, they had to first visit the vault, submit the note, receive the gold, return to the seller, buy the goods, and pay the 10 pieces of gold. The seller would then take the gold and return to the vault to deposit it, receiving a note of equivalent value. This was a protracted process, but to expedite matters, it sufficed for the buyer to hand the seller the note representing the value of the gold pieces and receive the commodity. In this manner, the gold in the vault transitioned into papers exchanged amongst people. Precisely as you might envision, these papers later evolved into banknotes. Let's not rush ahead, and let us remain in that era for a little longer. The vault owner, or let's call them the banker, recognized that people did not come to collect their gold. Instead, they used the promissory notes, considering them to represent the value of the gold held in the bank. Here, their cunning mind devised a brilliant scheme. Why not print promissory notes without any actual gold reserves in the bank, mere pieces of paper with no inherent value, but deriving their worth from the illusory gold held in the vault? People would only notice this if they all came simultaneously to demand their gold, an occurrence that seldom happened. Through this deception, the banker amassed an immense fortune seemingly out of thin air. The value of the paper notes equaled that of gold, and no one would have detected this ruse if not for the law of supply and demand. Gold, like any other commodity, adheres to the laws of economics. Therefore, the paper notes or the banknotes that people traded became commodities themselves. According to the law of supply and demand, the value of a commodity decreases when it becomes abundant, and vice versa. As gold became abundantly available due to the proliferation of counterfeit notes printed by the banker, its value diminished. The commodity that once equaled 10 pieces of gold and now equaled 20 pieces, as its value rose in relation to gold. It's important to note that gold itself did not decrease in value, rather, it was the value of the promissory notes or banknotes circulated among people that decreased. Therefore, if I wished to purchase a cloth garment worth 10 pieces of gold and went to the bank, received my gold, and then returned to the cloth merchant, I would discover that the price of the garment had risen to 20 pieces of gold. The value of the gold I held had decreased inexplicably, and as a result, I found myself needing to work harder to obtain less, even though gold remained gold, and cloth remained cloth. What caused this gap, or rather, what is known in economics as inflation? It refers to the increase in the value of a commodity in relation to the value of money. Of course, the trickery invented by the first banker, reaping vast wealth from it, made him nothing more than an amateur in comparison to his descendants, the demons who plundered nations' wealth and enslaved them. Throughout history, they have engaged in the same game, wherein the affluent amass further wealth while the impoverished sink deeper into destitution. Now, let us depart from that era and leap into our present time. Have you ever wondered how banks make money? Or, in simpler terms, if you deposit money in a bank as a deposit, you receive a monthly or yearly return, which is a certain percentage of the amount you deposited. Then, after a few years, you retrieve the full amount, only to discover that your money has grown or increased. Where does this increase come from, and is it genuine? Some believe that banks use your money to invest in industrial and commercial projects, and the increase in the deposited amount represents a portion of the profits from these ventures. Believe it or not, this is a naive answer, stretching the limits of naivete, or rather, an answer concocted by some to appease their consciences or the consciences of the slumbering masses. The truth is that banks generate profits through loans. Engrave this in your mind. Loans are the circle of financial servitude, the inexhaustible wellspring as long as the slumbering reside within it. Let's elucidate this matter more clearly to comprehend the true cycle of money and how demons crafted the financial system for deception and human subjugation. Do you recall the first demon who conceived the idea of the vault to safeguard gold? Notice that he didn't print promissory notes worth gold without having an actual gold reserve, but he also lent these notes to people. Thus, he became a creditor and possessed funds that had never existed before. In this process, he retained a small portion of gold in the vault as a reserve, in case someone came requesting real gold instead of worthless promissory notes. This portion is known as the fractional reserve system, which banks still employ today. So, when you deposit $10,000 in the bank, for example, the bank retains a small percentage of this amount in its vaults, known as the reserve ratio, which varies from one country to another. In the United States, as an example, this ratio is 10%, meaning the bank holds $1,000 in its vaults from the $10,000 you deposited. Now, what does the bank do with the remaining amount, $9,000? Well, another individual desires to purchase a car, goes to the bank, and borrows $9,000. Then, they give this amount to the seller, who, in turn, deposits it in the bank, which treats it as a new deposit, retaining 10% of it, which is $900, and lending the rest to another person. And thus, the cycle continues until the initial 10,000 become 100,000. Consequently, the bank's financial system has created $100,000 from simply using your money for loans. As a result, the interest rate you receive for depositing your money in the bank is a meager percentage compared to the profits the bank generates from your funds. Note that we have not discussed the bank's returns from interest on loans, but we must talk about the inflation created by this diabolical system and how the money you deposit in the bank does not increase at the interest rate as you may think, rather, it decreases in reality. Inflation, in its simplest definitions, is the decline in the purchasing power of money. In other words, the $10,000 you deposited in the bank, which could have bought a house, but you chose to invest it at a guaranteed interest rate, and indeed, after a year or more, the money accrued interest and became $12,000. It might seem good, but when you consider buying the same house that was worth $10,000, you discover that its price has now become $15,000 due to rising prices. Here, you may wonder, why did prices rise? The value of goods neither rises nor falls, it remains relatively constant depending on geographic factors. However, what rises or falls is the value of the colorful papers we believe to have real worth, while they have gained their value through a satanic deception. This is the trick of the financial system that was hidden from the herd, so they wouldn't understand how matters are managed at the pyramid's peak, and how the demons enslaved them through ignorance. Meanwhile, the awakened ones struggle to awaken others and lead them out of the matrix that has been imposed on their minds, blinding their eyes. Let's return once again to the 16th century, to the city of Frankfurt in Germany, in front of a Jewish banker named Mayer Amschel. He began his life at the Oppenheimer Bank and soon became a partner, benefiting from his father's lessons in money management and usurious transactions. Later, Mayer returned to the financial institution his father had established before his departure, reviving it, and choosing a new name for his family inspired by a red shield that his father had hung on the institution's door. This banker managed to establish a financial system that later dominated Europe's economy in the 19th century. He left behind one of the most famous families in the world, if not the most famous, the Rothschild family, pronounced Rothschild in the German dialect. Mayer Rothschild sent his 5 sons to the largest and most important European countries after training them to become geniuses in money management. They gained control over England, France, Italy, Austria, and, of course, their homeland, Germany. Mayer Rothschild established a strict system in the family, allowing men to marry only Jewish women from wealthy families to preserve their wealth and prevent its dispersion. This family played an indirect role in European political life and greatly benefited from wars, especially the series of wars that occurred in Europe during Napoleon Bonaparte's rule in France, known as the Napoleonic Wars. On the 18th of June in the year 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte was engaged in a pivotal battle against Britain in the village of Waterloo near the Belgian capital, Brussels. Nathan Rothschild, who founded the Rothschild family's bank in England, supported the British war effort and lent to the nations allied with Britain. Meanwhile, his brother James Rothschild, who established the Rothschild family's bank in France, supported the French. Nathan and James, along with their siblings, remarkably orchestrated relationships across the continent. They developed a communication network of agents to ensure the dissemination of political and financial information to family members, allowing them to maximize their influence in both markets and centers of power. They early on recognized the power of information. This network enabled them to transmit news of the Battle of Waterloo to Nathan Rothschild a full day before it reached the British government. It is said that he spread rumors indicating France's victory in the battle, causing stock prices to plummet on the stock exchange. Nathan Rothschild exploited this situation, buying stocks at reduced prices through intermediaries, and later selling them after the true news of Britain's victory in the subsequent rise in stock prices, amassing a colossal fortune through this maneuver. It is also said that he foresaw the future decline in government borrowing, which would lead to a decrease in the value of British government bonds. He purchased government bonds and waited for 2 years before selling them, yielding a 40% return, a substantial sum compared to the family's immense wealth. In this manner, the Rothschild family succeeded in bolstering their control over the British and European economies. As the saying goes, he who controls the money, controls power, influence, and decisions, capable of shaping or passing laws that serve his interests and maximize his gains. The family's next step was towards the New World at that time, namely the United States of America. However, the early fathers of the American nation understood the lesson well and resisted the financial system that the Rothschild family attempted to implement, under the guise of a central bank or the Federal Reserve. The third President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, said, "If the American people ever allow private banks to control their finances, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children will wake up homeless." Presidents continued to combat the financial system, especially the seventh President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, who engaged in a political struggle from 1829 to 1837, known as the Bank War, in order to thwart the financial system's malevolent forces from seizing control of America. Jackson survived an assassination attempt in January 1835, and when he fell ill, uttered his famous words, "The bank, Mr. Biddle, is trying to kill me, but I will kill it." He successfully closed the Second Bank of the United States, which had been established as a private institution, replacing it with state banks. As a result, the American economy flourished with real money, and the United States rose as a global superpower. However, the demons do not despair or surrender. They spare no means to ignite wars, incite revolutions, create crises, lend to governments for economic colonization, control the age of laws and legislation, and defraud the people's earnings. The schemes to establish private banks and control the state's economy continued until they succeeded during Woodrow Wilson's presidency in creating the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, a part of the United States Department of the Treasury. The IRS manages federal tax laws, diverting taxes not to the U.S. government but to the rogues of the financial system who acquired the authority to print currency under the guise of the Federal Reserve, which the slumbering believed to be a government bank. The war between the presidents and the demons persisted. In 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110, assigning the U.S. Department of the Treasury the task of issuing silver-backed banknotes. Banknotes in denominations of $2 and $5 were printed and signed as United States notes instead of Federal Reserve notes, in the pursuit of state dominion over the financial system. This executive order dealt a severe blow to the bankers who owned the Federal Reserve, as it would freeze the bank's rights and monopoly over currency printing, and the gradual transition of the prerogative of currency issuance into the hands of the state. 6 months later, in November 1963, Kennedy visited Dallas, Texas, riding in an open-top car, a circumstance that facilitated the task of a professional sniper who fatally shot him in the head. After Kennedy's assassination, his vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, assumed the presidency. One of his first decisions was to revoke Executive Order 11110. John F. Kennedy was the last president to attempt to confront the demons of the financial system and stand against the Federal Reserve. No president thereafter dared to challenge this power that had engulfed the United States of America. Can you imagine that this battle took place in a first world country? If so, consider the situation in third world countries. Did the demons face resistance as they did in the West? Do not hasten to answer, for the story still holds more compelling twists. In an earlier time, in the year 1944, the International Monetary Conference convened, bringing together representatives from 44 nations in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, USA. Their aim was to discuss the development of the international monetary system, encourage post-World War II trade, ensure exchange rate stability, prevent competitive devaluations, and promote economic growth. The Bretton Woods Agreement was signed during this conference, linking the US dollar to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce, approximately 31 grams. It designated the dollar as the international monetary standard for all currencies. The United States committed to supporting each dollar held abroad with an equivalent amount of gold, which they stored in their own vaults. This system meant that every country possessing $35 received roughly 31 grams of gold. Of course, they did not physically receive the gold, it was held in U.S. reserves. This system paralleled the original deception of the first demon who conceived the idea of banking. However, with one significant difference, it was now nations being deceived, and the United States, under the control of the demons of the financial system, was on its way to perpetrate the greatest theft in history. Under the Bretton Woods Agreement, the dollar became equivalent to gold, and nations rushed to hoard it as if it were real gold that could be acquired at any time. Initially, the Bretton Woods system functioned efficiently, resulting in exchange rate stability compared to the dollar, one that has become a globally trusted currency, akin to gold. However, in 1970, U.S. President Richard Nixon consulted with the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, the Secretary of the Treasury, and the Undersecretary for Monetary Affairs. The following year, in 1971, he delivered his infamous Nixon Shock speech to the world. In this address, Nixon reneged on the U.S. commitments to exchange gold for dollars and decided to free the dollar's exchange rate. In other words, to float the dollar, meaning its value would be determined by market forces based on supply and demand. Thus, the world woke up to the fact that the United States was printing dollars without a gold backing and had acquired the world's gold in exchange for a pile of paper. Naturally, no one dared to object or confront the economic and military might of the United States, lest the millions they held in their vaults became worth less than tissue paper. And so, the nations willingly surrendered their wealth to the demons of the financial system, who now printed dollars at their whim, drowning the world, including the United States itself, in inflation, and plundering the wealth of nations in exchange for green paper. They possessed the money that made them a force controlling the world like chess pieces, igniting wars, fueling revolutions, manipulating systems, altering and changing as they pleased, and commanding to be obeyed. Woe and destruction await those who dare to deviate from the prescribed path. They not only know the rules of the game but are the ones who established these rules, dressed falsehood in the garb of truth, and deceived the slumbering with the importance of borrowing, while loans are among the surest paths to ruin households. Do you now understand why God prohibited usury? Have you grasped how they stealthily infiltrated us while we slept and emptied our pockets? Have you seen how they deceived the world and looted the wealth of nations, enslaving them? Believe me, you haven't seen anything yet, for these demons have stolen more than just money.